The alarm bells had been silent for 3 hours on Luna Base Delta, Admiral. Veltar watched the massive viewscreen from his command throne aboard the Korthek flagship Dominator. His purple skin gleamed under the harsh bridge lighting as he studied the tactical display. 17 star systems had fallen to his forces in just 3 months. The humans would be no different. "Admiral, our advanced scouts report Luna Base Delta is completely dark," reported his tactical officer. "No energy signatures, no communications, no movement." Veltar clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. "The humans fled before we arrived. Deploy landing forces to secure the facility." The first transport ships descended through Luna's thin atmosphere toward the mining base. Veltar expected to find abandoned equipment and hasty evacuation signs. Instead, his soldiers found something far more disturbing. Every system was still. Running, the lights were on. Fresh food sat on tables in the cafeteria. Personal belongings remained in living quarters. 300 human workers had simply vanished without a trace. "Sir, it looks like they just walked away mid-shift," the ground commander reported. "The mining equipment was still running when we arrived. But there are no bodies, no signs of struggle, no evacuation records." Veltar frowned. In 17 previous conquests, fleeing populations always left evidence of their departure. Ships missing from hangars, damaged equipment from hasty evacuations, communications logs showing panic and confusion. Luna Base Delta showed none of these signs. "Scan for human life forms in the surrounding area," Veltar ordered. "Already completed." "Sir, our sensors detect no biological signatures within 50 kilometers. No heat sources, no electromagnetic activity, no movement patterns." The second transport approached Mars Colony 6 hours later. Veltar expected a similar result, but the mining colony presented an even stranger puzzle. The facility's automated systems continued operating normally. Cargo shipments sat ready for transport. The security cameras showed empty corridors and work areas, but no signs of violence or evacuation. "This is impossible," muttered Veltar as science officer. "A population of 800 humans cannot simply disappear. Our sensors would detect decomposing organic matter if they had died. Our thermal imaging would show recent heat signatures if they had evacuated." Captain Roy crouched behind a ventilation grate 3 meters above the Korthek patrol. He had been motionless for 2 hours, controlling his breathing and heartbeat through meditation techniques learned in military training. The alien soldiers walked directly beneath his position, their heavy boots clanking on the metal flooring. Their advanced sensors swept the corridor repeatedly, but they never looked up. The Korthek had impressive technology, but they searched like machines. They followed predetermined patterns, scanned at preset intervals, and relied completely on their electronic equipment. They never considered that their prey might be watching them from concealment. Roy had studied captured Korthek equipment for months before the invasion. Their sensors detected energy signatures, movement patterns, and biological functions. But they had limitations. They couldn't penetrate certain metals. They had difficulty distinguishing stationary objects from background clutter. Most importantly, they were calibrated for Korthek physiology, not human biology. The patrol moved past Roy's hiding spot and continued down the corridor. He waited another 10 minutes before moving, using hand signals to communicate with his team hidden throughout the facility. The Korthek had declared Mars Colony 7 secured, but 15 human survivors remained hidden in maintenance areas, storage compartments, and service tunnels. "Report from ground forces," announced Veltar's communications officer. "Third patrol has failed to report in. That makes 12 missing patrols in the past day." Veltar rose from his command throne and walked to the tactical display. Red markers showed the positions of missing Korthek units across 3 different locations. No distress signals had been received. No weapon discharges had been detected. His soldiers were simply vanishing. "Deploy probe droids to search areas." Where patrols disappeared, he ordered. The mechanical scouts launched from Korthek ships and began systematic searches of human facilities. Their sensors were more sensitive than portable military equipment, designed to detect the smallest traces of biological activity. They found nothing except empty corridors and abandoned workstations, but something was wrong with the probe reports. Equipment had been moved slightly between scans. Doors that should have been locked were found open. Supply caches showed signs of recent access, though no life forms had been detected in those areas. Sergeant Mills watched the probe droid hover past his concealment. He had pressed himself into a maintenance alcove barely large enough for his body, covered by salvaged thermal shielding material. The droid's scanners swept across his position 3 times without detecting him. When it finally moved away, Mills carefully emerged and checked his watch. The patrol schedule was exactly as predicted. The humans had spent weeks studying Korthic behavior patterns before engaging them directly. The aliens were creatures of habit who followed rigid military protocols. Their patrols followed the same routes at identical time intervals. Their probe droids searched in predictable patterns. Their command structure was inflexible and slow. To adapt, most importantly, the Korthic had never fought an enemy that refused to engage them directly. Every species they had conquered tried to match their firepower with superior technology. The humans were doing something completely different. They were making the Korthic fight shadows. Lieutenant Davis led a strike team through the service tunnels beneath Europa Station. The passages were too narrow for Korthic soldiers in their bulky armor, too low for their 7-foot height, and too numerous to guard effectively. The humans moved through their own infrastructure like water flowing through pipes. Above them, Korthic forces controlled the main levels of the station. Their sensors showed the facility was secured and empty of human presence. But those same sensors couldn't penetrate the layers of metal and insulation that surrounded the maintenance areas. The strike team reached their objective, the station's primary power distribution center. They didn't sabotage the system or cause dramatic explosions. Instead, they made subtle adjustments that would cause equipment failures over time. Lights that would flicker randomly, computers that would crash unexpectedly, environmental systems that would malfunction intermittently. Admiral, we're receiving reports of technical problems across multiple facilities, the communications officer announced. Equipment failures, system malfunctions, communication breakdowns. Veltar studied the reports with growing confusion. His engineering teams found no evidence of sabotage. No explosive damage, no severed cables, no obvious signs of tampering. Yet Korthic equipment was failing at an unprecedented rate in human territories. Sir, request permission to bring additional engineering specialists from the fleet, his ground commander requested. Denied. We have sufficient technical personnel. The humans fled and left behind faulty equipment. Our people will adapt. But the problems continued to escalate. Korthic soldiers reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision that vanished. When they turned to look, supply convoys arrived at destinations to find their cargo had been subtly tampered with. Communications equipment produced strange noises and phantom signals. The most disturbing reports came from patrol units who claimed they were being watched. Soldiers would get an overwhelming feeling of being observed, but their sensors detected nothing. The feeling was so strong that entire units would abort their missions and return to secured areas. Dr. Webb studied Korthic physiology from her hidden laboratory deep within an asteroid mining facility. The aliens had excellent forward vision and sophisticated technological senses, but their peripheral vision was limited. They relied heavily on their equipment to compensate for biological limitations. Humans had evolved as both predators and prey. They could remain motionless for hours while hunting. They could detect the subtle signs of being stalked by other predators. They could move through natural environments without leaving obvious traces. The Korthic had evolved as apex predators on a world with little competition. They had never needed to hide or use stealth. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. They had no experience fighting an enemy that refused to be found. Webb's research revealed another crucial weakness. The Korthic Empire had conquered other species by demonstrating their power and forcing surrender. They had never fought a prolonged conflict against determined resistance. Their military was designed for quick, decisive campaigns, not extended. Guerrilla warfare. The psychological reports from Korthak forces showed increasing stress and confusion. Soldiers were requesting additional backup for routine patrols. Commanders were demanding constant communication checks with their units. The entire invasion force was becoming paranoid and inefficient. "Admiral, our casualty reports are unusual," the tactical officer reported hesitantly. "Explain." "We have over 300 missing personnel, but no confirmed enemy kills. No battle damage to our equipment. No evidence of combat. Our people are simply disappearing without explanation." Veltar had conquered civilizations with billions of inhabitants, but he had never faced an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were conducting a haunting, the morning briefing aboard the Korthak flagship revealed disturbing trends that Admiral Veltar could no longer ignore. His intelligence officers presented data that contradicted everything he knew about warfare. Human resistance was increasing despite having no apparent organization, no visible leadership, and no detectable communication networks. "Show me the tactical situation on Titan base," Veltar commanded. The holographic display illuminated a detailed map of the mining facility. Red markers indicated areas under Korthak control, which appeared to be the entire complex. Blue markers showed confirmed human sightings, of which there were none. Yellow markers indicated unexplained incidents, and these covered nearly every section of the base. "Our forces control all strategic locations," reported the intelligence officer. "Yet our equipment suffers daily malfunctions. Our patrols report finding evidence of human presence in areas our sensors confirm are empty. Supply levels decrease without authorization, but our inventory systems show no discrepancies." Commander Stone pressed himself against the wall as the Korthak patrol passed his position for the third time that day. The aliens had established a predictable routine that made avoiding them simple for anyone with patience and planning. They searched the same areas at identical intervals. Trusting their sensors to detect any threats, Stone had spent 15 years learning how to become invisible to both human and electronic observation. The techniques that worked against human military forces were even more effective against aliens, who had never developed countermeasures for true stealth operations. The camouflage netting draped over his position had been constructed from materials found in any hardware store. Metallic threads disrupted electromagnetic scans. Thermal layers absorbed and redistributed heat signatures. Sound-dampening materials eliminated acoustic detection. To Korthak sensors, Stone appeared to be part of the facility's infrastructure, but the real advantage was psychological. The Korthak expected their enemies to behave logically. They anticipated resistance movements would establish command structures, communication networks, and supply lines that could be detected and destroyed. They had no experience with opponents who operated as independent cells without coordination or central planning. Dr. Webb emerged from her concealment only after the patrol had been gone for 20 minutes. She had been studying Korthak behavioral patterns and had discovered significant weaknesses in their sensory capabilities. Their vision was optimized for their homeworld's bright, uniform lighting. In the varied illumination conditions of human facilities, they missed obvious details. More importantly, the Korthak relied heavily on their technology to compensate for biological limitations. When their sensors reported an area was clear, they didn't conduct visual searches. When their equipment indicated no threats were present, they didn't maintain tactical alertness. They had become dependent on their instruments to a degree that would have been considered dangerous by human military standards. Webb had also learned that Korthak hearing was optimized for their own vocal frequencies. Human voices in normal conversation were nearly inaudible to them unless they used electronic amplification. This meant humans could coordinate activities using simple spoken communication from distances that would be impossible for the aliens to detect. The discovery had revolutionary implications for resistance operations. Small teams could maintain contact during missions without any risk of electronic detection. They could pass warnings, share intelligence, and coordinate timing using nothing more sophisticated than careful whispers, Sergeant Mills had organized the survivors at Europa Station into hunting teams that operated without any central command structure. Each team consisted of 3 to 5 people who had worked together before the invasion. They knew each other's capabilities, could communicate with minimal words or gestures, and could operate independently for weeks without external support. The key to their success was understanding that they weren't trying to defeat the Korthik military directly. They were trying to make the cost of occupation higher than the value of conquest. Every patrol that returned with equipment problems, every facility that required constant maintenance, every supply convoy that needed additional escorts represented resources the Korthik couldn't use elsewhere. Mills watched through a ventilation grate as Korthik engineers attempted to repair a communication array for the 4th time that week. The humans hadn't damaged the equipment in any obvious way. Instead, they had made subtle adjustments that caused intermittent failures. Loose connections that would work properly for days before failing, software modifications that introduced random errors, physical alterations so minor they wouldn't be detected by standard diagnostics. The effect was devastating to Korthik efficiency. Their forces spent more time maintaining equipment than conducting military operations. Their commanders lost confidence in their communications and sensor networks. Their supply officers couldn't determine whether shortages were caused by equipment, failures, or enemy action. Lieutenant Davis had discovered that Korthik night vision technology was actually inferior to natural human eyesight under low light conditions. The aliens' artificial enhancement systems were designed for the complete darkness of space operations, not the varied lighting conditions found in human facilities. This created opportunities for movement that the Korthik couldn't comprehend. Humans could navigate corridors in near darkness while alien patrols required artificial illumination. Areas that appeared pitch black to Korthik vision were perfectly navigable for humans with natural night vision. Davis led reconnaissance missions through Korthik-occupied territories using routes that would have been impossible for the aliens to follow. Service tunnels without lighting, maintenance areas with minimal illumination, outdoor spaces during the facility's night cycle. The humans moved through their own infrastructure like they owned it, because in many ways they still did. The psychological impact on Korthik forces was becoming severe. Soldiers reported feeling watched constantly, even when their sensors detected no other life forms. Equipment would be found moved or adjusted in ways that should have been impossible if the areas were truly empty. Personal items would disappear from secured locations and reappear in different places days later. Captain North had organized civilian volunteers into an intelligence network that operated using pre-digital communication methods. Messages were passed through dead drops, coded signals, and personal meetings that left no electronic trace. The information they gathered was more current and accurate than anything the Korthik intelligence systems could provide. The network tracked alien patrol schedules, supply movements, and equipment deployments across entire continents. They identified patterns in Korthik behavior that revealed weaknesses and opportunities. Most importantly, they coordinated their activities to maximize confusion and misdirection when Korthik forces moved to investigate reports of human activity in one location. The resistance would stage incidents in 3 other areas. When alien patrols focused on securing supply routes, resistance teams would demonstrate their ability to access supposedly protected facilities. The Korthik never knew where the next incident would occur or how many humans they were actually facing. Major Cross specialized in psychological operations that targeted Korthik confidence rather than their equipment. His teams would leave evidence of human presence in locations the aliens considered completely secure. A tool moved slightly from its original position. A door found unlocked that should have been sealed. Personal messages written in languages the Korthik couldn't read left where they would be discovered during routine inspections. The effect was more damaging than direct sabotage. Korthik commanders began to doubt their own security measures. Soldiers requested additional backup for routine tasks. Supply officers implemented increasingly complex verification procedures that slowed operations to a fraction of normal efficiency. Cross had studied the psychology of occupation forces throughout human history. The most effective resistance tactics weren't those that inflicted casualties, but those that made the occupying force feel constantly threatened and vulnerable. An enemy that could strike anywhere at any time was more demoralizing than one that fought pitched battles and lost. The Korthik military doctrine had no provisions for this type of warfare. Their training emphasized overwhelming force and technological superiority. Their tactics assumed enemies would attempt to match their capabilities directly. They had never encountered opponents who refused to fight on their terms. Admiral Veltar reviewed daily reports that painted an increasingly confusing picture. His forces controlled every strategic location in human territory. Their sensors detected no organized resistance. Their intelligence gathered no evidence of human military activities. Yet his casualties continued to mount and his operational efficiency declined daily. Admiral, our ground commanders are requesting permission to implement martial law protocols, his aide reported. Against what enemy? Our sensors detect no human military presence. Our intelligence indicates no resistance organization. What exactly would martial law accomplish? The aide hesitated before responding. Sir, the commanders report their personnel are becoming unnerved by the situation. They request authority to treat any unexplained incident as evidence of enemy action. Veltar considered the implications. His forces were being defeated by an enemy they couldn't identify, locate, or understand. The humans had turned their own invisibility into a weapon that was more effective than any technology the Korthik Empire had encountered. For the first time since beginning his military career, Admiral Veltar was fighting a war he didn't know how to win, the war room deep. Beneath Ceres Station hummed with quiet activity as Colonel Reed studied intelligence reports from across human space. Unlike the high-tech command centers the Korthik expected to find, this facility operated using equipment salvaged from mining operations and civilian installations. The aliens searched for military communication networks and found nothing because the humans were using modified civilian radio equipment. Reed had been a military historian before the invasion, specializing in asymmetric warfare throughout human history. He understood something the Korthik Empire had never learned. Superior technology was useless if you couldn't find your enemy. Every successful resistance movement in human history had relied on the same basic principles that were now defeating an interstellar empire. Status report from all sectors, Reed requested from his communications officer. Titan reports successful infiltration of the main supply depot. No casualties, no detection. Mars Colony 7 confirms disruption of 3 patrol routes without direct confrontation. Europa Station has compromised the alien communication relay, causing intermittent failures across the entire sector. The reports painted a picture of coordinated resistance that existed only in Korthik imagination. The truth was simpler and more terrifying for the aliens. Individual human teams were operating independently, without central command or communication. Yet their actions created the impression of a vast organized network. Captain North crouched in the ventilation system above the Korthik command post. On Ganymede, the aliens had established their headquarters in what they considered the most secure location on the moon, surrounded by sensor arrays and patrol routes that should have made infiltration impossible. They never considered that humans might already be inside their perimeter before they arrived. North had been hiding in the facility for 6 weeks, living off supplies cached throughout the station and moving through maintenance areas the Korthik never thought to search. He observed their daily routines, memorized their security procedures, and documented their weaknesses. The intelligence he gathered was more valuable than anything their advanced sensors could provide, the Korthik commanders. Below him were discussing deployment schedules and resource allocations in their native language. North didn't understand their words, but their body language and tone revealed frustration and confusion. They gestured at tactical displays showing areas they claimed to control, yet their posture suggested uncertainty about those same areas. Most revealing was their behavior during shift changes. Korthik officers who should have been confident in their security looked nervous when walking through their own facilities. They checked corners unnecessarily, looked over their shoulders without reason, and grouped together more closely than military efficiency required. Major Cross watched the Korthik patrol approach his position with the patience of a predator. He had been motionless for 4 hours, pressed against a wall in a pose that looked uncomfortable but could be maintained indefinitely with proper training. The aliens passed within 2 meters of his location, their sensors scanning the area repeatedly, but they never detected him. The key was understanding how Korthik technology worked. Their sensors were calibrated for their own biology and movement patterns. They detected the electromagnetic signatures of their equipment, the thermal patterns of their physiology, and the acoustic frequencies of their voices. Humans registered as background noise on most of their detection systems. Cross had developed techniques for exploiting these limitations that were now being used by resistance teams across human space. Body positions that minimized thermal signatures, breathing patterns that reduced acoustic detection, materials that absorbed or redirected sensor scans. The methods were simple, but they required discipline and training that most species had never developed. After the patrol passed, Cross moved to his objective, a supply cache that the Korthik considered completely secure. He didn't steal anything obvious or cause dramatic damage. Instead, he made subtle changes that would cause problems later. Food supplies that would spoil faster than expected. Equipment with loosened connections that would fail during critical moments. Ammunition with slightly altered specifications that would cause weapon malfunctions. The effect was more devastating than direct sabotage because it couldn't be predicted or prevented. Korthik supply officers never knew when their next shipment might be compromised. Soldiers couldn't trust their equipment to function properly. Commanders lost confidence in their logistics and support systems. Dr. Foster had established a research facility in an abandoned mining complex that the Korthik had searched 3 times without discovering. The laboratory was hidden behind false walls constructed using standard construction materials. To alien sensors, it appeared to be solid rock. To human eyes, it was obviously a concealed entrance. Foster's team had been analyzing captured Korthik technology for months, discovering weaknesses that could be exploited using common civilian equipment. Their electromagnetic shields could be disrupted by radio transmitters modified with components from any electronics store. Their thermal imaging could be confused by heating elements salvaged from kitchen appliances. Their communication systems could be jammed using equipment built from spare parts. The research had revealed something even more important. Korthik technology was designed for fighting other advanced civilizations. It was optimized to counter sophisticated weapons, electronic warfare systems, and military technologies. It had no defenses against the low-tech, improvised solutions that humans were using. Doctor, we're receiving reports that our countermeasures are being implemented across 12 different facilities. Her assistant reported, "Excellent. How are the Korthik forces responding?" According to our intelligence network, they're requesting additional technical support from their fleet. They can't understand why their equipment keeps failing in ways their diagnostic systems can't detect. Foster smiled grimly. The Korthik were trying to solve their problems using the same technological approach that created them. They brought more advanced sensors to detect equipment that was specifically designed to be invisible to sensors. They implemented more sophisticated security measures to stop infiltrators who weren't using advanced infiltration techniques. Sergeant King led his reconnaissance team through the industrial sector of Vesta Colony, using routes that existed only in the station's original construction blueprints. The Korthik had studied the facility's official layouts, but they didn't know about the maintenance passages, emergency routes, and service tunnels that weren't included in standard documentation. The aliens moved through human facilities like tourists following a guidebook. They went where they expected to go, saw what they expected to see, and missed everything that didn't fit their preconceptions. They searched for hidden military installations and missed obvious civilian spaces. They looked for sophisticated camouflage and ignored simple concealment. King's team had been sabotaging Korthik operations for weeks without being detected. They didn't use explosives or weapons. Instead, they created situations that wasted alien resources and time, equipment that required constant maintenance, supplies that needed frequent replacement, security systems that produced false alarms. The psychological impact was more important than the material damage. Korthik forces were spending more time responding to problems than conducting military operations. Their efficiency ratings had dropped to levels that would have been considered unacceptable in peacetime. Their commanders were requesting additional personnel to handle routine tasks that should have been simple. Commander Price had organized civilian volunteers into support networks that operated using social connections rather than military structure. Families helped hide supplies. Workers shared information about Korthik movements. Community leaders coordinated activities without leaving any electronic trail. The network was invisible to Korthik intelligence because it didn't look like a military organization. There were no commanders to identify, no communication systems to monitor, no supply chains to disrupt. The resistance operated like a natural part of human society because it was a natural part of human society. Price had studied the social dynamics of every successful resistance movement in human history. They all shared common characteristics that the Korthak had never encountered: decentralized organization, redundant communication, and deep integration with civilian populations. The aliens were fighting not just human soldiers but human civilization itself. The breakthrough came when Price's team demonstrated they could reach the highest levels of Korthik security without detection. Using nothing more sophisticated than stolen uniforms and basic voice modulation equipment, human operatives walked through alien command facilities unnoticed. The Korthik had never developed security procedures for infiltration because no enemy had ever managed it successfully. Colonel, we're receiving confirmation that Operation Ghostwalk was successful. The communications officer reported to read. Details? Our operatives accessed 3 separate Korthik command facilities over the past week. They gathered intelligence on troop movements, supply schedules, and strategic planning. No alarms were raised, no security breaches were detected. Reed nodded with satisfaction. The Korthik Empire had conquered 17 star systems using overwhelming force and advanced technology. But they had never fought an enemy that could walk among them invisibly, that could strike from within their own secure areas, that could turn their strengths into weaknesses. Admiral Veltar stared at the intelligence reports that described an impossible situation. His forces controlled every strategic location in human territory, yet they were losing the war. His technology was superior to anything humans possessed, yet it was ineffective against human tactics. His military was larger and better equipped than any resistance force in galactic history, yet it was being defeated by an enemy that refused to fight. Admiral, our casualty reports show a disturbing trend, his intelligence officer reported. Explain. We have lost over 800 personnel in the past month, but we have achieved 0 confirmed kills against human forces. Our missing soldiers simply vanish without sending distress signals. Our equipment failures occur without explanation. Our facilities suffer constant problems that our technical teams cannot diagnose. Veltar had conquered civilizations with billions of inhabitants and never faced resistance this effective. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They were conducting a campaign of psychological warfare that was more devastating than any military defeat. For the first time in his career, Admiral Veltar was beginning to understand that superior firepower was meaningless against an enemy that could not be found. General Blake adjusted his position carefully in the natural cave system that served as the Resistance Command Center. The facility had been excavated by human miners decades before the invasion, then abandoned when the ore deposits were exhausted. To Korthik sensors, it appeared to be empty rock. To the humans hiding inside, it was the nerve center of the most successful resistance campaign in galactic history. The cave system extended for kilometers through the asteroid, connected by tunnels that were too narrow for Korthik soldiers and too numerous to map completely. The aliens had scanned the asteroid 3 times, declared it uninhabited, and moved on to more obvious targets. They never suspected that 200 resistance fighters lived and worked beneath their feet. Blake reviewed intelligence reports from across human space while sitting at a desk carved from living rock. The communications equipment around him had been salvaged from mining operations and modified to operate on frequencies the Korthik couldn't detect. Solar panels hidden on the asteroid's surface provided power through cables that followed natural cracks in the rock. "General, we're receiving confirmation that the Void Hunters have arrived in system," his communications officer reported. Blake had been expecting this development. The Korthik Empire had deployed their most elite forces to deal with what they considered a minor insurgency problem. The Void Hunters were warriors trained to fight in the harshest conditions across the galaxy, equipped with experimental detection equipment designed to find any form of life. "What's our assessment of their capabilities?" Blake asked. "According to our intelligence network, they're using quantum sensors that can detect biological processes at the molecular level. Their armor is designed to operate in complete vacuum. Their weapons can function in any environment. They're essentially perfect soldiers," Blake smiled grimly. Perfect soldiers were exactly what the humans needed the Korthik to deploy. Elite forces operated according to even more rigid protocols than regular military units. They were more predictable, more dependent on their technology, and more psychologically vulnerable to tactics they hadn't trained to counter. Commander Price led the operation that would prove human infiltration capabilities exceeded anything the Korthik believed possible. His team had studied Void Hunter equipment for weeks, identifying weaknesses in their seemingly impenetrable defenses. The key wasn't matching their technology, but understanding how their minds worked. The Void Hunters expected their enemies to behave like military opponents. They anticipated attacks using weapons, explosives, or electronic warfare. They prepared for enemies who would try to fight them directly or disable their equipment. They had no contingency plans for opponents who would simply hide until they passed, then follow them back to their base. Price watched through a concealed observation post as a Void Hunter patrol conducted their search of the industrial complex. Their movements were precise and professional, but they followed predictable patterns. They searched where their training told them enemies might hide, but they ignored locations that seemed too obvious or too exposed for concealment. The humans used this psychological blind spot to their advantage. They hid in plain sight, concealed in locations the Void Hunters dismissed as impossible or impractical. Maintenance alcoves that appeared too small for human occupancy. Storage areas that seemed too exposed for hiding places. Service tunnels that looked too inconvenient for military use. After the patrol passed, Price's team emerged from their concealment and followed the Void Hunters back to their temporary command post. The elite soldiers never suspected they were being stalked by the same enemies they had been searching for. Their advanced sensors detected no pursuit because the humans used techniques that predated electronic detection by thousands of years. Sergeant King had discovered that Korthik thermal imaging technology had a critical flaw when used in the diverse environments of human facilities. The system was calibrated for the uniform conditions of their homeworld and military vessels. In the varied thermal landscape of human installations, it produced false readings that could be exploited by anyone who understood its limitations. King's team had learned to match their body temperature to surrounding objects using techniques that required no advanced technology. Thermal blankets could redistribute heat signatures. Contact with metal surfaces could cool exposed skin to ambient temperature. Simple breathing exercises could reduce the thermal output of human metabolism. The effect was devastating to Void Hunter confidence. Their most advanced detection equipment was reporting empty corridors while they experienced the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Their quantum sensors detected no biological activity while their instincts screamed that enemies were nearby. "Command, this is Hunter Team Alpha," the patrol leader reported. "We are detecting anomalous readings in Sector 7. Request technical support for sensor calibration." The response from their command post revealed growing frustration. Hunter Team Alpha, this is the fourth calibration request today. Our technical staff confirms all equipment is functioning within normal parameters. Understood, Command. But our sensors indicate this area is empty while our tactical assessment suggests otherwise. King listened to the exchange from his concealment. 3 meters away. The Void Hunters were beginning to doubt their own equipment exactly as he had hoped. Elite soldiers who couldn't trust their technology were no longer elite soldiers. Captain Ward led a team that specialized in endurance operations beyond anything the Korthak had encountered. His people could remain hidden and operational for weeks using minimal resources, waiting patiently for the perfect opportunity to strike. They survived on cash supplies, maintained their equipment without external support, and operated independently of any command structure. The Void Hunters were designed for short-duration missions with comprehensive logistical support. They expected their enemies to reveal themselves through necessity, the need for food, water, communication, or medical supplies. They had never fought opponents who could remain completely self-sufficient while hidden inside enemy-controlled territory. Ward's team had been observing the Korthak command facility on Europa for 3 weeks without being detected. They learned the alien schedules, identified their weaknesses, and planned operations with precision that would have been impossible during rushed engagements. When they finally acted, their strikes were perfectly timed and completely unexpected. The sabotage was subtle but devastating. Communication systems that would fail during critical moments, environmental controls that would malfunction when most needed, security systems that would produce false alarms at precisely the wrong times. The Void Hunters found themselves dealing with equipment failures that seemed coincidental but occurred with suspicious frequency. Dr. Morgan had been studying Korthak social structure and military culture from her hidden laboratory. Her research revealed something crucial about their elite forces. They were psychologically incapable of adapting to prolonged guerrilla warfare. Their training emphasized decisive action and clear objectives. They became frustrated and ineffective when faced with enemies who refused to engage directly. The Void Hunters are reporting increasing stress levels among their personnel. Morgan explained to Blake during their secure communication session. Their medical staff is treating symptoms of paranoia, anxiety, and combat fatigue after only 2 weeks of deployment. What's causing the breakdown? Blake asked. They're fighting an enemy that violates every assumption their training has taught them. They can't find us, can't predict us, and can't defend against us effectively. Their confidence is being systematically destroyed by encounters that make no sense according to their military doctrine. The psychological warfare was more effective than kinetic weapons. Elite soldiers who doubted their capabilities were worse than regular troops with normal confidence levels. The Void Hunters were beginning to hesitate during operations, second-guess their decisions, and request backup for routine tasks. Lieutenant Davis coordinated simultaneous strikes across multiple facilities to demonstrate the scope of human capabilities. While Korthak forces on Mars searched for saboteurs in their mining operations, resistance teams near Jupiter were disabling supply convoys. While Void Hunters investigated incidents on Europa, civilians were infiltrating command facilities on Ganymede. The operations were timed to create maximum psychological impact. The Korthak commanders received reports of human activities across their entire operational area within hours of each other. The implications were terrifying. Either the humans had a vast organized network that had remained undetected, or individual teams were more capable than anything the aliens had encountered. The truth was even more disturbing. The humans weren't coordinating their activities through advanced communication systems. They were operating independently based on shared understanding of resistance principles learned through centuries of human warfare. Each team acted when conditions were optimal, creating the appearance of coordination without any actual central planning. Captain Ross had been working deep within the Korthak intelligence network for weeks, using captured uniforms and forged identification to access their most secure facilities. The aliens had never developed security procedures for enemy Infiltration because no previous opponent had possessed the necessary skills. Human operatives could walk through Korthic installations undetected by following simple rules: move with purpose, avoid eye contact, and act like you belong. The intelligence Ross gathered revealed the true extent of Korthic confusion. Their reports described human resistance activities that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Enemies who could appear and disappear at will. Sabotage that occurred in areas under constant surveillance. Supply shortages that happened despite secure transportation and storage. Most importantly, Ross learned that the Korthic High Command was beginning to question the competence of their field forces. Admiral Veltar was receiving reports that seemed to describe incompetent soldiers and malfunctioning equipment rather than effective enemy action. The disconnect between official reports and tactical reality was creating a crisis of confidence at the highest levels of command. General, our intelligence assets confirm that Korthic morale is reaching critical levels, Ross reported to Blake during their encrypted communication session. Their personnel are requesting transfers out of human space. Their commanders are filing reports that contradict each other. Their logistics officers can't explain their supply problems. Blake had seen this pattern in historical resistance movements. Occupying forces began to crack when they realized they couldn't establish effective control over hostile territory. The Korthic were discovering that conquering human facilities was easy, but holding them was impossible. The Void Hunters attempted to implement new security procedures designed to counter human infiltration techniques. They established random patrol schedules, installed additional sensor arrays, and implemented verification protocols for all personnel. The measures were comprehensive and should have been effective against any conventional enemy. But the humans adapted faster than the Korthic could respond. When patrol schedules became random, resistance teams simply waited longer before moving. When sensor coverage increased, they found new routes through areas the aliens hadn't considered. When verification procedures were implemented, they acquired new identification documents through methods the Korthic couldn't predict or prevent. The most demoralizing incidents occurred when human operatives demonstrated they could reach the Void Hunters command personnel directly. Personal items would disappear from officers' quarters and reappear days later in different locations. Private communications would be interrupted by mysterious interference. Equipment would be found adjusted in ways that served no tactical purpose except to prove human access. Major Cross led the operation that shattered Korthic confidence completely. His team infiltrated the flagship Dominator during a routine supply transfer, using forged credentials and stolen uniforms to access areas that should have been completely secure. They didn't sabotage critical systems or steal important information. Instead, they left evidence of their presence in Admiral Veltar's personal quarters. The message was clear: if humans could reach the fleet admiral undetected, nowhere in. The Korthic military was truly safe. The psychological impact was more devastating than any military defeat. Elite soldiers who couldn't protect their own commanders were not elite soldiers. Admiral, security reports a breach of your personal quarters, Veltar's aide announced hesitantly. Explain. Sir, items have been moved and personal effects have been rearranged. There's no evidence of how the intruders gained access. No sensor alerts, no security violations, no trace of their methods. Veltar stared at the aide in disbelief. His quarters were located in the most secure section of the flagship, protected by multiple layers of electronic surveillance and armed guards. The idea that human infiltrators could reach him personally was impossible according to every military doctrine he had studied. Show me. The personal quarters revealed subtle but unmistakable signs of human presence. Books had been moved slightly from their original positions. Personal photographs had been rearranged. A handwritten note in human script had been left on his desk containing a simple message: "You cannot hide from us." The implications were terrifying. If humans could reach him aboard his own flagship, they could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. The Korthic military was not fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting ghosts who could materialize anywhere and vanish without trace. Veltar convened an emergency meeting of his senior staff to address the deteriorating situation. The conference room filled with officers who should have been confident in their superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Instead, they looked nervous, uncertain, and defeated. "Status report from all departments," Veltar commanded. "Sir, casualty reports show we have lost over 1,500 personnel in the past month with 0 confirmed enemy kills," the intelligence officer reported. "Our equipment failure rate has increased by 300%. Our operational efficiency has dropped to 40% of normal levels. Medical reports indicate widespread stress-related disorders among our personnel." The chief medical officer added, "Symptoms include paranoia, insomnia, and acute anxiety. Our psychological evaluation teams recommend immediate rotation of all ground forces. Engineering reports that our equipment failures cannot be explained by standard diagnostic procedures," the technical officer continued. "The malfunctions appear random but occur with suspicious frequency. Our repair teams spend more time maintaining equipment than our forces spend using it." Veltar listened to reports that described a military force being defeated by an enemy they couldn't find, couldn't fight, and couldn't understand. The Korthic Empire had conquered 17 star systems using overwhelming force and advanced technology. They were being defeated by humans using techniques that predated spaceflight. "Admiral, request permission to implement withdrawal protocols," his ground commander suggested. The suggestion hung in the air like an admission of defeat. The Korthic Empire had never withdrawn from a conquest. They had never encountered resistance they couldn't overcome through superior firepower. They had never faced an enemy that could turn their own strengths into weaknesses. Veltar realized he was fighting a war that couldn't be won through conventional means. The humans weren't trying to destroy his forces directly. They were making the cost of occupation unbearable while demonstrating that his military couldn't protect itself from invisible enemies. The Ghost War was ending not with a final battle, but with the gradual recognition that some enemies couldn't be defeated by any amount of technology or firepower. The humans had won by becoming something the Korthak had never encountered, truly invisible when they chose to be. Admiral Veltar stood alone in his command center, staring at tactical displays that told a story he refused to accept. 3 months ago, the Korthic Empire had controlled every strategic location in human space. Today, those same locations existed, in a state of perpetual siege by enemies that couldn't be seen, detected, or eliminated. The holographic displays showed his forces maintaining their positions across dozens of facilities, but the reality was far different. His soldiers spent more time repairing equipment than conducting operations. His officers requested constant backup for routine tasks. His supply lines required massive escorts to transport basic necessities. "Admiral, incoming priority communication from High Command," his communications officer announced. Veltar accepted the transmission with growing dread. The Korthic Supreme Council had been monitoring the human situation with increasing concern. An empire that had conquered 17 star systems in 3 months should not require additional resources to control a single species with primitive technology. "Admiral Veltar, explain your recent requests for additional forces." The Supreme Commander's voice echoed through the bridge. "Supreme Commander, the human resistance has proven more persistent than anticipated. We require additional personnel to maintain operational security. Our intelligence reports indicate you have committed nearly half our total military strength to control human territories. Yet your casualties continue to mount with no decisive victories achieved." Veltar hesitated before responding. How could he explain that his forces were being defeated by an enemy that refused to fight? How could he describe soldiers who vanished without trace or equipment that failed without explanation? "The humans employ unconventional tactics that our standard military doctrine does not address," he finally admitted. "Elaborate." "They refuse to engage our forces directly. They operate through sabotage, infiltration, and psychological warfare. Our sensors cannot detect them consistently. Our security measures cannot contain them effectively." The silence that followed was more ominous than any reprimand. The Supreme Commander was processing information that contradicted everything the Korthic Empire understood about warfare. Superior technology and overwhelming force should have guaranteed victory against any primitive species, Colonel Hart coordinated. The final phase of human resistance from his mobile command post deep within the asteroid belt. Unlike the Korthak, who required massive installations to support their operations, human forces could operate from small facilities hidden in locations. The aliens would never think to search. The resistance had evolved beyond simple survival. They were now systematically demonstrating that Korthic forces could never establish true control over human territory. Every facility the aliens occupied was subject to constant infiltration. Every supply convoy faced potential sabotage. Every patrol risked simply disappearing without explanation. Colonel, intelligence reports that Korthak High Command is conducting strategic reviews of their occupation policies, his aide reported. What kind of reviews? Cost-benefit analyses, resource allocation studies, personnel rotation schedules. They're treating this as an administrative problem rather than a military one. Hart smiled with grim satisfaction. The Korthak were beginning to understand that they weren't fighting a war in any conventional sense. They were attempting to occupy territory defended by a population that could not be subdued, detected, or eliminated through normal military means. The economic analysis was devastating to Korthak planning. They were spending more resources maintaining control over human facilities than those facilities produced in strategic value. Their military was being drained by an enemy that cost them nothing to fight but everything to defeat. Captain Ross had been monitoring Korthak internal communications for weeks, gathering intelligence that revealed the true scope of alien frustration. Their field reports described impossible situations that violated basic military logic. Equipment that functioned perfectly until humans were nearby. Security systems that detected nothing while intruders operated freely. Personnel who vanished from areas under constant surveillance. The most revealing communications came from Korthak medical facilities. Their psychological evaluation teams were treating stress disorders that resembled combat fatigue, but their patients had never engaged in actual combat. Soldiers were experiencing battlefield trauma from fighting an enemy they had never seen. The Korthak medical staff is recommending immediate rotation of all ground forces, Ross reported to Hart. Their personnel are suffering psychological damage from prolonged exposure to human resistance tactics. What's their assessment of the situation? According to their internal reports, they believe they're fighting an enemy that possesses supernatural abilities. Their scientific teams cannot explain how humans achieve the effects they're observing. Hart had seen this pattern in resistance movements throughout human history. Occupying forces eventually broke when they realized they were fighting something beyond their comprehension. The Korthak were discovering that their advanced technology was useless against opponents who had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Dr. Morgan completed her final analysis of Korthak social structure and military psychology. Her research confirmed what the resistance leadership had suspected: the alien empire was fundamentally incapable of adapting to guerrilla warfare. Their entire civilization was built around technological superiority and overwhelming force. The Korthak military doctrine has no provisions for extended occupation duty, Morgan explained during her briefing to the resistance leadership. Their forces are designed for quick, decisive campaigns against enemies who fight conventional battles. They have never encountered opponents who refuse to engage directly. What are the implications for their continued presence in human space? Hart asked. Their military effectiveness decreases the longer they remain. Their personnel suffer psychological damage from fighting an incomprehensible enemy. Their resource expenditure increases while their strategic gains diminish. Eventually, they will conclude that human territory is not worth the cost of occupation. The analysis proved accurate within days of its completion. Korthak forces began implementing withdrawal protocols that they disguised as strategic redeployment. Supply convoys departed with more equipment than they delivered. Personnel transfers moved more soldiers away from human facilities than toward them. Major Cross led the operation that convinced the Korthak High Command that human resistance capabilities exceeded anything they could counter effectively. His team infiltrated the flagship Dominator one final time, not to sabotage or steal, but to deliver a message directly to Admiral Veltar. The message was simple but devastating. Complete technical specifications for every piece of Korthak equipment deployed in human space. The humans had been studying alien technology for months, learning its capabilities and limitations in greater detail than the Korthak understood themselves. Admiral, the humans have delivered intelligence reports that detail our military capabilities. With impossible accuracy, the intelligence officer reported with obvious distress. Impossible. Our security protocols prevent any unauthorized access to technical specifications. Sir, they know details about our equipment that are classified at the highest levels. They understand our sensor limitations, our communication frequencies, our tactical doctrines. They know more about our capabilities than our own technical staff. Veltar reviewed the human intelligence reports with growing horror. Every weakness his forces had experienced was documented with scientific precision. Every failure his equipment had suffered was explained in technical detail. The humans had been studying his military while remaining completely invisible to his sensors. The implications were overwhelming. If humans could gather this level of intelligence while avoiding detection, they could access any information, sabotage any system, and eliminate any target they chose. The Korthak military was not fighting a primitive resistance movement. They were fighting an intelligence organization that surpassed their own capabilities. General Blake received confirmation that Korthak forces were beginning systematic evacuation of human territories. The aliens weren't retreating because they had been defeated in battle. They were withdrawing because they had finally understood the nature of their opponent. General, our intelligence networks confirm that Korthak High Command has classified human space as unoccupable, his communications officer reported. What classification are they using? Strategic liability. They have concluded that the resources required to maintain control exceed any potential benefits. They are recommending complete withdrawal from human territories. Blake had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. The defeat of a technologically superior enemy through methods that predated spaceflight. The humans had won by becoming something the Korthak could never counter, truly invisible when they chose to be. Admiral Veltar issued the final withdrawal orders with a mixture of relief and humiliation. The Korthak Empire had never retreated from a conquest, but they had never encountered an enemy like the humans. His forces would return to their ships and depart human space, leaving behind facilities they could never truly control. All units, implement Withdrawal Protocol 7, Veltar announced to his fleet. Evacuation will commence immediately and continue until all personnel are recovered. The response from his ground commanders revealed the psychological toll of the conflict. Officers who should have been disappointed by retreat instead expressed gratitude for escape. Soldiers who had never been defeated in battle were eager to leave an enemy they had never been able to fight. The Korthak Empire withdrew from human space not because they lacked the firepower to continue, but because they had learned something that would reshape their understanding of warfare. Superior technology was meaningless against opponents who could remain invisible when they chose to be. The Ghost War ended without a final battle, without surrender negotiations, without formal treaties. It ended with the gradual recognition that some enemies could not be defeated through any amount of force or technology. The humans had won by refusing to fight on alien terms, by using their own strengths instead of matching alien capabilities. As the last Korthak ships departed human space, resistance fighters emerged from hiding places that had remained undetected throughout the entire conflict. They had proven that the most advanced military in galactic history could be defeated by patience, stealth, and the determination to remain invisible until victory was achieved. The war was over, and the humans had won by becoming ghosts that haunted an empire until it chose to flee rather than face the unknown.